The day my children left me at that cheap nursing home did not feel real at first. It felt like one of those bad dreams where everything is slightly off, but you cannot wake up no matter how hard you try. The building itself looked tired, like it had been holding too many stories for too long. The paint on the walls was peeling in quiet corners. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic mixed with something older, something sadder, like forgotten memories. Then had nowhere else to go. I remember holding my purse tightly in my lap as if it was the last piece of my old life that I still owned. My daughter Sarah stood in front of me, but she would not look me in the eyes. Her hands kept moving, adjusting her bag, fixing her sleeve. Anything to avoid the moment. Mom, it is temporary, she said, her voice soft but distant, like she was speaking from another room. Temporary, I repeated in my mind, trying to hold onto that word as if it could comfort me, but it did not. It only echoed louder and louder inside my chest. My son Daniel stood beside her, his posture stiff, his arms crossed, like he had already decided everything and was simply waiting for this part to be over. You will be taken care of here, he added quickly, almost defensively, as if he expected me to argue. We have our own lives too, you know, our own lives. Those words settled heavily between us. I wanted to remind him of the nights I stayed awake when he was sick, the mornings I rushed to get him ready for school after working late, the sacrifices I never spoke about, because that is what love is supposed to be, quiet and steady and unconditional. But I said nothing because I could already see that the boy I raised was no longer standing in front of me. Instead, there was a man who saw me as an obligation, something inconvenient, something that needed to be managed. I do not need much, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Just a small space in your home, somewhere I can sit and watch you live your life. Sarah sighed, not loudly, but enough for me to hear, enough for me to understand that my words had not reached her heart. Mom, we have already talked about this, she replied. This place is affordable and practical. Affordable, the word struck deeper than anything else. It made me feel like a problem that had been solved with the lowest possible cost, as if my entire life could be measured and reduced to a monthly payment. I looked around the room again, at the thin curtains, the narrow bed, the small table by the window. This was not a home, this was a waiting room for the end of life, and my children had chosen it for me because it fit their budget. They did not hug me when they left. Sarah gave a quick smile that did not reach her eyes and said, "We will visit soon." Daniel nodded once, like he had completed a task, and then they both turned and walked away. I watched them go, my heart silently begging them to turn around, to realize what they were doing, to remember who I was to them, but they did not. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and in that moment the silence became unbearable. It wrapped around me, pressing in from all sides until I could barely breathe. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway, trying to understand how everything had changed so much, how the children I had once carried in my arms had become strangers who could leave me behind without looking back. A nurse eventually came, and her expression neutral, her movements practiced. She showed me to my room, helped me place my small bag on the chair, and gave me a quick explanation of the daily routine. Her voice was kind but distant, like someone who had learned not to get too close to the people here. After she left, I sat on the edge of the bed and let my hand run over the thin blanket. It felt rough beneath my fingers, unfamiliar and cold. I lay down slowly, staring up at the ceiling where small cracks formed patterns that reminded me of broken branches, and I wondered if this was how it felt to be erased, not all at once but piece by piece, until nothing remained except a quiet memory that no one visited. As the evening turned into night, I could hear distant sounds from other rooms, soft coughs, a television playing somewhere, a faint cry that was quickly hushed. Each sound was a reminder that I was not alone, and yet I had never felt more alone in my life. My mind drifted back to the years when my home was full of laughter, when Sarah would run into the kitchen asking for help with her homework, and Daniel would sit at the table pretending to study while sneaking extra snacks. Those days felt so vivid, so close, and yet impossibly far away now. I remembered the promises I made to myself after their father passed away, how I would do everything in my power to give them a good life, how I would protect them from the harshness of the world. I worked long hours, sometimes 2 jobs at once. I skipped meals when money was tight. I sold the jewelry my husband had given me piece by piece, each time telling myself that it was worth it because my children deserved the best. And I never once regretted those sacrifices, because every smile, every achievement, every moment of happiness they experienced felt like a reward greater than anything I could have asked for. But lying there in that narrow bed, I began to question everything, not the love I had for them, but the belief that it would always be returned in the same way. Perhaps I had been naive, perhaps I had believed too strongly in a version of family that only existed in my heart. Tears filled my eyes, and this time I did not try to stop them. They slipped silently down my temples, soaking into the pillow beneath me as if the bed itself was absorbing my sorrow. I turned onto my side, clutching the edge of the blanket like a child seeking comfort, but there was none to be found, only the steady ticking of time moving forward without pause. At some point during the night I must have fallen asleep, because I woke to the faint light of morning filtering through the curtains. For a moment I felt disoriented, unsure of where I was, but then the reality of my situation returned all at once. Heavy and unyielding, I sat up slowly, my body stiff, my heart heavier than before, and as I looked around the small room, again I realized that this was not just a place where I had been left, this was a place where I had been forgotten. The thought settled deeply inside me, and with it came a quiet realization. I had spent my entire life giving everything to my children, believing that love alone would be enough to keep us together, but love cannot force someone to stay. It cannot make them see your worth if they have already decided that you no longer fit into their lives. I stood up and walked to the window, pushing the curtain aside to look outside. The world beyond the glass was moving as it always had, people passing by, cars driving somewhere important, life continuing without any awareness of the small room where I now stood, watching from a distance. And in that moment something shifted inside me, not anger, not bitterness, but something quieter, something stronger, a sense of clarity that I had not felt before. I had lost my home, yes, but more than that, I had lost the illusion that my children would always be there for me no matter what. And as painful as that truth was, it also brought with it a strange kind of freedom, because if they could choose to walk away, then perhaps I could choose how I would face the days ahead. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, as if releasing the weight of years that I had carried without question, and I made a silent promise to myself. I would not let this place define me. I would not let their choices break me completely, because somewhere deep inside, the woman who had raised them, the woman who had survived loss and hardship and endless sacrifice, still existed, and she was not ready to disappear just yet. Even if the world had decided to place me in a corner and forget about me, I would remember who I was, and perhaps one day they would too. But until then, I would endure, I would watch, I would wait, and I would find a way to turn this ending into something they never expected. The days inside that nursing home did not pass. They dragged slowly, like heavy chains pulling against my spirit. Each morning began the same way, with the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway and the distant clatter of metal trays as breakfast was prepared for people who no longer expected anything from life. I would wake up before the staff came, and not because I was eager for the day, but because sleep had become a fragile thing filled with memories that refused to stay buried. I would sit up in that narrow bed and stare at my hands for a long moment, noticing the lines and the slight trembling, as if time itself had settled into my skin, reminding me of everything I had lived through and everything I had lost. The room never changed, the same dull walls, the same small window, the same thin curtain that barely moved even when the air outside shifted. It felt like a place where time had decided to stop, yet my thoughts never stopped. They wandered, constantly drifting between the past and the present, between the life I had built and the reality I was now forced to accept. At first I tried to keep myself occupied. I spoke politely to the staff, I nodded at the other residents, I followed the routine as if I could blend into it and somehow make it easier to bear. But I quickly realized that most of the people there had already given up. They moved slowly, spoke rarely, and carried a quiet emptiness in their eyes that frightened me, because I could see what I might become if I allowed myself to fade in the same way. I refused to let that happen, not because I was stronger than them, but because there was something inside me that refused to die, something that had been shaped by years of struggle and sacrifice, something that had not yet accepted defeat. Every morning I would walk to the window and look outside, watching the world continue as if nothing had changed. People hurried past with purpose, cars moved in steady lines, and somewhere beyond my sight life unfolded in ways that no longer included me. And yet that window became my connection to everything I had lost and everything I still held onto in my heart. It was there that I began to think more clearly about my children, about the choices they had made and the choices I had made for them. I did not hate them, no matter how easy it would have been to let anger take over. I could not erase the years of love that had defined our relationship, but I also could not ignore the truth that they had abandoned me when I needed them the most. And that truth settled deeply within me, not as a wound that bled constantly, but as a quiet ache that reminded me to see things as they truly were rather than as I wished them to be. As the days turned into weeks, I began to notice something else, something that had been buried beneath the pain and confusion, a sense of awareness that I had not felt in years. It was as if being stripped of everything familiar had forced me to look at my life from a different perspective, to examine not only what I had given but also what I had protected for so long. The memory came to me one afternoon as I sat by the window, the sunlight falling gently across my lap, warming my hands in a way that felt almost comforting. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was no longer in that room. I was back in my old home, standing beside my husband in the quiet of our living room, his voice steady and calm as he spoke about the future. We had always been careful people, not out of fear but out of understanding. We knew that Life could change in an instant, that security was not something to take for granted, and so we made a decision together, one that we never shared with anyone, not even our children. We created a secret, a safeguard hidden away from the world, something that would remain untouched until the right moment. A safe, not just a physical object, but a symbol of everything we had worked for, everything we had protected. Inside it we placed documents, savings, investments, and things of value that could shape a future if used wisely, but more importantly, we placed a condition, an unspoken understanding that whoever received it would have to prove something far more important than need. They would have to prove their heart. After my husband passed away, that responsibility became mine alone. I guarded that secret quietly, never mentioning it, never giving any hint of its existence. I watched my children grow into adults. I supported them, encouraged them, and hoped that they would carry forward the values we had tried to instill in them: kindness, responsibility, loyalty. I believed that when the time came, they would naturally show those qualities, not because of any reward, but because it was who they had become. But as I sat there in that nursing home, I realized that life does not always unfold according to our hopes. People change, circumstances shape them in ways we cannot control, and sometimes the very things we believe to be unshakable begin to crack under pressure. The thought of the safe no longer felt like a distant memory. It felt like a quiet presence waiting patiently for its purpose to be fulfilled, and for the first time I allowed myself to consider what that purpose truly was. Was it simply an inheritance, something to be passed down without question, or was it something more? Something that could reveal the truth about the people I loved. The idea stayed with me, growing stronger with each passing day until it became impossible to ignore. I began to see my situation not just as an ending, but as a test, not only for my children but for myself as well. I had spent so many years giving without expecting anything in return, but perhaps this was the moment to ask for something not material, not superficial, but something deeper, something that could not be measured in money or possessions. The realization did not come with excitement or satisfaction. It came with a calm certainty that settled into my heart like a quiet decision finally made. I continued my routine, outwardly unchanged, but inside I was different. I observed more closely, listened more carefully, and thought more deeply about everything that had led me to this place. The absence of my children remained a constant reminder of the distance that had grown between us. They did not visit, they did not call, and at first that silence hurt more than anything else, but over time it became something else, something that allowed me to see clearly without the distraction of empty promises or half-hearted words. I stopped waiting for them to appear at the door. I stopped hoping for apologies that might never come. Instead, I focused on understanding what I needed to do when the moment arrived. And then one day that moment came in the simplest way possible. A nurse approached me in the afternoon, her expression neutral as always, holding a small phone in her hand. She said, "Your daughter is on the line." For a brief second my heart reacted before my mind could catch up. A flicker of hope, a sudden rush of emotion, but I steadied myself quickly, reminding myself of everything I had already accepted. I took the phone slowly, bringing it to my ear, and said, "Hello." There was a pause on the other end, and then I heard Sarah's voice. It sounded different from how I remembered it, not warm, not distant, but tense, as if she was unsure of how to begin. "Mom," she said finally, "we were going through some old things at the house, and we found something, a key." She hesitated for a moment before continuing, "Do you know anything about it?" The words were simple, but the meaning behind them was clear, and in that instant everything fell into place. They had found it, the first piece of the secret we had hidden so carefully all those years ago. I closed my eyes briefly, allowing myself to feel the weight of that realization, not as a shock but as a confirmation that the time I had sensed approaching was now here. I could have answered immediately, could have explained everything, could have given them the information they were seeking, but I did not. Instead, I let a small smile form on my lips, one that she could not see, but that carried more meaning than any words I could have spoken. "Yes," I said quietly, "I know what it opens." There was a shift in her tone, an urgency that she could not hide. "What is it, Mom?" she asked quickly. "What does the key open?" I leaned back slightly in my chair, my grip on the phone steady, my voice calm. "It is connected to something your father and I created a long time ago," I replied. "Something important?" There was another pause, this one filled with anticipation. I could almost picture her expression, the way her eyes would widen, the way her mind would begin to race with possibilities. "Is it money?" she asked, her voice lower now, almost careful. "Is it something valuable?" I did not answer her question directly. Instead, I allowed a different kind of silence to settle between us, one that carried its own message. "Something far more valuable than money," I said slowly, "something that reveals the truth." And as those words left my mouth, I knew that everything was about to change, not just for them but for me as well, because the secret I had carried for so long was no longer just a hidden part of my past. It was now the key to everything that would come next. The test had begun, whether they realized it or not, and for the first time since I had been left In that place I felt a sense of control return to me, not in a way that sought revenge or punishment, but in a way that allowed me to finally see clearly what my children valued and who they had become. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the safe was no longer just a safeguard, it was a mirror, and soon they would have to face what it showed them. The day they arrived, I had already prepared myself for their presence. I knew they would come, not out of love or concern, but because the key had stirred something in them that could not be ignored. I waited in my room, sitting quietly on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of years pressing against my spine. The door opened softly, and there they were, Sarah and Daniel, standing awkwardly in the doorway, their expressions carefully composed, their smiles a little too bright, their eyes scanning the room as if searching for clues to my state of mind. They stepped inside hesitantly. Daniel was the first to speak. "Mom," he said, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. "We found the key," Sarah added, her voice slightly higher than usual as if to balance Daniel's tone of excitement with a hint of nervousness. I looked at them calmly, letting the silence stretch long enough to make them uncomfortable. Finally I spoke. "Yes," I said quietly, "that key opens a safe your father and I created years ago." I watched their faces carefully, noting the flicker of realization that passed through their eyes, and then something else: curiosity and greed combined into a dangerous mix. They leaned forward instantly, their bodies drawn to the words like moths to a flame. "How much is in it?" Daniel asked, unable to hide his eagerness. I did not answer. Instead, I let the moment linger, giving them time to feel the weight of their own intentions. I asked a question of my own. "Why are you here?" I said softly. Sarah blinked, unsure what I meant. "What do you mean, Mom?" she asked. "We came to see you," I replied gently. "No, you did not come to see me. You came because of the key." Silence fell again, heavy and undeniable, and in that silence the truth was laid bare. I could see it in their eyes. They did not come out of love, they came out of desire for what they believed was rightfully theirs. I sighed and continued, "Yes, I know what you are thinking, the contents of the safe, but the question is whether you are worthy of it." They looked at me with a mixture of confusion and irritation. "Worthy of it?" Daniel said. "What do you mean?" I held their gaze and said, "It is not about money or possessions. It is about who you are, what you have become, how you treat those who love you most." They did not understand at first, but I could see their minds turning, trying to reconcile the excitement of discovery with the discomfort of my words. I continued, "Your father and I created that safe not just as a place to store wealth, but as a test to see who would act with integrity and who would act out of selfishness. If you are here only for the contents, then you have already failed." Their expressions faltered a little. Sarah looked down. Daniel shifted uneasily, the first crack in their composure. I leaned back, letting it take hold. I could feel the power of years of patience and quiet observation culminating in this moment. I had watched them grow from children into adults. I had seen their triumphs and failures. I had loved them without reservation, and now they were confronted with a truth they could not escape: that love alone did not guarantee anything. Not trust, not loyalty, not even respect. I stood slowly, letting them see the lines on my face, the gray streaks in my hair, the hands that had labored endlessly for them. These were the marks of a life fully given but not always reciprocated, and in that moment I saw something shift in them, a flicker of recognition, a tiny spark of guilt, perhaps the beginnings of understanding. But it was not enough yet. I needed more than that. I needed them to prove that they remembered what it meant to be my children, to care for me not as a duty or obligation, but because they genuinely wanted to. I said, "You will have to earn it." They looked at me incredulously. "Earn it?" Daniel said. "I raised you, I fed you, I protected you. What more could you want?" I smiled softly. "More," I said, "because what I am asking for cannot be measured in years of sacrifice or sleepless nights. It is measured in the present, in the way you act now. The choices you make when no one is watching will determine whether the contents of that safe are yours or not." They were silent again. Sarah fidgeted with her hands. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, the first real sign of discomfort I had seen from them in years. I continued, "Every day from now on you will visit, you will help, you will listen, you will care, not because you must, but because you choose to, because you remember who I am and who you were." I could see the resistance building in them, their minds struggling against the concept that love required action, that it was not just something freely given. And yet I held firm. This was not negotiation, this was not punishment, this was a lesson, one I had waited years to impart, a lesson that they could not learn from words alone. I saw Sarah glance at Daniel, her eyes softening a little. He looked back with a reluctant nod, and in that tiny exchange I knew the first step had been taken. It was small, but it was enough for now. I let the room fall silent again, allowing them to digest what I had said, the weight of responsibility settling upon them slowly like a tide rising to meet the shore. They were no longer children, but adults faced with a choice, the choice of whether to be the people I had always hoped they would become or to continue down the path of self-interest. I could feel my own heart relaxing slightly, knowing that the seed of awareness had been planted. I said nothing more that day, letting them leave with the knowledge that their actions now mattered more than words or promises. They walked out, awkwardly, their steps heavy with thought, and I returned to the window, watching them go, feeling a mix of satisfaction and sorrow that only a mother could understand. The days that followed were filled with small gestures, each visit bringing a little more authenticity, a little more care. Sarah began to bring tea the way I liked it. Daniel fixed small things around the room that I had long ignored. They listened to my stories, asked questions about my past, and I responded with measured patience, allowing myself to see glimpses of the children I had once known. Slowly over time I noticed laughter returning to the room, quiet at first and then a little louder, the tension easing ever so slightly as they began to prove their intentions. I did not rush them. I let them stumble, let them realize that the road to earning trust and love was not instant, and yet each step forward was a victory in its own right. I watched them learn the hard way that desire alone was not enough, that love required action, attention, respect, and genuine care. And I waited patiently, knowing that the safe was not just a test of greed but a reflection of character. And as the sun set each evening, casting long shadows across the room, I felt a quiet pride, seeing the beginnings of change in the two people who had once abandoned me. They had found the key, but more importantly, they were beginning to find themselves, and in that discovery I realized the power of patience, the strength in holding firm, the value of teaching lessons that could not be rushed. I had been abandoned, yes. I had been left behind, yes, but I had also grown stronger because of it, because in the quiet and in the pain I had learned how to wait, how to watch, how to guide. And now, as they stood before me once again, I understood that the real inheritance was not the contents of a hidden safe, but the transformation that had begun within their hearts. The path ahead was still long, filled with challenges and tests, and yet for the first time in years I felt a cautious hope that perhaps the family we had lost could be rebuilt, not overnight, not perfectly, but with effort, love, and intention. And that was a start. The days that followed their first visits became a rhythm that I had not expected. Each morning I woke with a quiet sense of anticipation, not for gifts or words of apology, but for the simple gestures that showed me they were beginning to care. I watched Sarah bring my tea just the way I liked it, and Daniel fix the small, broken things in my room that I had long ignored. Their movements careful, tentative, but genuine. It was not perfect, but it was real, and in those small actions I began to see a glimmer of the children I had once known. Slowly the awkwardness between us began to fade, replaced by conversations that lasted longer than necessary and laughter that returned to the room in soft waves. I let them talk, I let them ask questions about the past, about my life, and I answered honestly, sharing stories I had long held close, letting them see the woman behind the mother, the woman who had loved them fiercely and now required nothing but recognition of that love in return. I did not rush them, nor did I demand perfection. Each day was a lesson in patience and understanding that healing and change could not be forced, but could only be nurtured carefully over time. As the weeks passed, I began to notice subtle changes in them. Sarah would sit for longer periods holding my hand without being prompted, and Daniel would linger after finishing tasks to listen to my stories or help me with small chores around the room. I saw their eyes soften, the tension that had been there initially replaced by something warmer, something that suggested genuine care and remorse, not only for the abandonment but for the way they had prioritized desire over love. In that quiet growth I felt a sense of quiet triumph, not because I had outsmarted them, but because I could see the seeds of understanding taking root. They were beginning to grasp the truth that love was not simply a word or an obligation, but an action that required awareness, effort, and consistency. One evening, as the sun cast long shadows across the room, I asked them to bring me home, not to their houses, but to mine, the house they had almost forgotten, the home that had nurtured their childhood and that had become a symbol of my life spent in dedication. I walked slowly through the familiar rooms, letting memories wash over me, and they followed behind, silently respectful and attentive. The air was thick with emotion and unspoken words. I approached the old cabinet where we had hidden the safe and reached behind it. Slowly clicked. The sound was sharp and final as the mechanism opened, revealing the contents carefully preserved for decades. Their eyes widened as they took in the documents, the money, the letters, and the tangible proof of the life we had built together. Sarah picked up the letter and began to read aloud, the words carefully crafted decades ago, carrying weight far beyond the physical value contained within. To our children, it began, this is not just an inheritance, it is a reflection of who you are when no one is watching. If you are reading this with love in your hearts, then everything here is yours. If not, then you have already lost something far more valuable. As the words echoed in the room, I saw their expressions shift, recognition, remorse, hope, all tangled together. Daniel looked at me, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Mom, he whispered, we do not deserve this. I smiled softly, not with pride or triumph, but with quiet understanding. Perhaps not before I said, but people can change. The truth of those words hung in the air, a tangible thing that filled the room, and I closed the safe, gently signaling that the contents were no longer the focused, but the lesson had been delivered and received. Sarah hugged me tightly, crying into my shoulder, and for the first time in a long while I felt the warmth of their presence, not as obligation or duty, but as genuine love and care. The real inheritance was not in the documents or money or letters, it was in the recognition that they had almost lost me, and in realizing the value of family before it was too late. We spent the evening talking, reminiscing, laughing, and sharing memories. The bond that had been frayed by time and neglect slowly mending in ways that could not be measured by anything tangible but could be felt deeply in our hearts. I could see the relief and understanding in their eyes that they had underestimated the depth of my love and the resilience of my spirit in teaching them that lesson. I had shown them what it meant to respect, cherish, and nurture the people who shaped their lives, and as the night wore on, the room filled with a quiet peace, I felt a weight lift from my chest, a sense of fulfillment that only comes from knowing that the hard path of patience and perseverance had finally borne fruit. I knew that there would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt, missteps, and misunderstandings, but the foundation had been rebuilt brick by brick with care and intention, and that was enough. For now, we would face the future together as a family, not perfect, not unscarred, but stronger for having endured the trials that had once threatened to break us, and in that shared understanding, in the mutual recognition of love lost and found, I realized that the true revenge I had quietly orchestrated was not in withholding wealth or holding secrets, it was in making them understand the value of what they almost discarded and giving them the opportunity to reclaim it through genuine effort and heartfelt care. In the end, the room was no longer just a place where I had been left, it was a place where healing began, where love was proven, not just spoken. And as we sat together in the quiet of that evening, sharing stories of the past, planning small joys for the future, I understood that my patience, my strength, and my unshakable sense of worth had guided them back to me, and for the first time since that fateful day when they left me at the cheap nursing home, I felt whole, not because of what they had brought me, but because of what they had become. And in that moment I knew that the chapters of abandonment and hurt had closed, and a new chapter of recognition, understanding, and unconditional love had begun for all of us together.